It is a move so famously terrible, even the anime has made fun of it. Who could forget Ash's Scraggy and its spectacular display of inaccuracy? Usually the anime is pretty much as far removed from the competitive world as you can get, but in that moment, it was nothing short of a documentary.
That's a focus blast? Want to tell me where the focus went?
Indeed, how can a move with such a name struggle to land so often? Is this commentary by Game Freak on dwindling attention spans in the modern age? Did they predict TikTok, Subway Surfers, or your roommate who has to watch YouTube videos at 1.5 speed because otherwise they can't concentrate? And most of all, if this move is so awful, why does it keep getting used? Today, we are unraveling the mystery of the most obnoxiously unreliable move in the competitive world. No disrespect to its similar obnoxious cousin Stone Edge, but we're talking about a move in a league of its own. Today, we're talking Focus Blast, the most infuriating move in the game. Or if you prefer, how bad was Focus Blast actually? Focus Blast's introduction in Generation 4 was initially met with delight, a concept now mind-boggling in its absurd naivete, so optimistic it borders on willfully ignorant. The new physical special split meant fighting moves could now be used by special attackers, and this was a blessing given how important it was a coverage option. Super effective slams against steel, dark, rock, normal, and ice? That's a pretty significant list of types, especially given such types' resistances to many special attacking stabs. Gengar's Shadow Ball terrorizes most Pokemon that don't resist it, which is many. However, the Pokemon that do resist it are highly significant and popular. It's a similar story of Alakazam and Reuniclus' Mighty Psychic, Thundurus' Thunderbolt, Tornadus' Hurricane, both with Tapu Lele stabs, and if you're playing Ubers, Darkrai Dark Pulse. But with Focus Blast, suddenly many of these resists to these stabs aren't actually answers because of how badly they get dropped. Excadrill resists Megazam Psychic, sure, but is it an actual check? Well, 30% of the time, yes. But we're not talking about the accuracy yet. In idealistic terms, Excadrill is not at all a Megazam answer because it gets slammed by Focus Blast just as something like Keldeo gets slammed by Psychic. Look at it this way, offensive Psychic types without Focus Blast are almost always worse than those that do have the move. The coverage is just too important, as it becomes far easier to answer them with any Steel and Dark types, as opposed to the more specialized measures necessary against a Focus Blast Zam. Without Focus Blast, any T-Tar can answer Zam quite decently. With Focus Blast, it's suddenly forced to run Shopple Berry, severely compromising its utility elsewhere, which can be taken advantage of easily by Alakazam's team. This conundrum is completely non-existent against, say, Espeon. It's not just Psychics either. If Thundurus suddenly lost Focus Blast, it would become a lot easier to deal with. Ferrothorn wouldn't be nearly as scared of it, Excadrill becomes a great answer, Tyranitar and Heatran improve greatly. So if Focus Blast has such high upsides, and rest assured they are stratospherically impactful, you can get over in perfect accuracy, right? After all, Pokemon is a game of odds anyway, and it's worth it for the power. Choice Band Tyranitar runs Stone Edge, not Rock Slide, after Advance anyway. Specs Water types use Hydro Pump. These are 80% accurate too. And then you remember that offensive Heatran regularly relies on Magma Storm, which is 75% accurate in Gen 5 and later. So what we're really asking is, how bad is 70% actually? Well, Pokemon being a game of odds is exactly why you don't want to have to rely on 70%. Now, this is a tad oversimplified. There's more to things than it just being 70%, of course, which is what this video is exploring. But 70% really sounds very good when players regularly rely on Scald Burns, and Scald Burn rates is less than half of Focus Blast's miss rate, if you believe Game Freak's lies anyway. However, the official reason Scald is so dependable and Focus Blast is so very not is simple. Scald is coming from bulky Pokemon that get many chances to use the move, who are not completely ruined if the move doesn't burn, and the move still does good damage if it doesn't burn. Focus Blast, on the other hand, is coming from frail attackers who don't have many opportunities to throw the move out and are likely KO'd if they don't hit. Even smart players trying to maximize their odds are so often burned by it. Use Focus Blast on the Switch so you have 2 chances to hit and get that KO, not just 1. Sure, it's still a gamble, but it seems reliable. Like you've got that Howard Ratner feeling where you'll know it'll work and everything will be copacetic. And well, that sounds good and everything, but there are countless tales of consecutive misses, far too many on far too a consistent basis for the whole thing to boil down to the occasional bad luck. If not on the Switch, it's Sash Zam losing a one-on-one because it just needed to hit 1 focus and wound up missing 2. It doesn't help that the move does absolutely nothing if it misses either. Unlike Scald, this simple principle is why the 60% from Jirachi Ironhead flinches feels so reliable, and why the 60% from Gengar Hypnosis is one of the riskiest clicks in the game. There has even been a tournament battle where a player missed 8 out of 8 Focus Blasts, and it wasn't even them exhausting all their Focus Blast PP on one Pokemon either. It was an effort concentrated across two separate ones. One could make the argument that relying on two Focus Blasters is unreliable, but one could also say that having a backup Focus Blaster increases your odds to land at least one, seeing how impactful the move is. Well, this is unless your opponent is using it anyway, at which point it seems more of a challenge for them to miss than hit as they Focus Blast their way through your team of Excadrill, Ferrothorn, Heatran, and Tyranitar. This is exactly why Focus Blast is so risky though. As well as you position yourself and support your Focus Blaster or blasters with your teammates, the fact of the matter is your Focus Blaster is going to come face to face with a Pokemon that takes all their other moves but crumples the Focus Blast. Probably not just one Pokemon either. Look at how many of these Focus Blast targets are paired together, and if hitting one Focus Blast is terrifying, hitting multiple is just obscene. The problem, if Focus Blast hits, these Pokemon are absolutely incredible. It is really just Focus Blast accuracy that is keeping them from effortlessly ripping through all in their path, as its awful accuracy genuinely becomes a legitimate win condition for opponents. Hoping your opponent misses a Fire Blast? Get good, you got outplayed. Hoping your opponent misses a Focus Blast? Completely reasonable. A statistical sound strategy. Hyperbole, of course, but only a bit. We mentioned Pokemon being a game of odds, so let's look at the odds. The chance of hitting 2 of 2 Focus Blasts is 49%. That's basically a coin flip, and in literal terms, it's even worse. You are the lucky one if you hit 2 straight Focus Blasts. Thus, as straightforward as it seems for Zam to rip through an entire team of Focus Blast weak Pokemon, it's actually one of the most unreliable plans you can make. Or consider how unreliable it is for Zam to simply have to land 2 Focus Blasts to win a one-on-one matchup. As with all the great Focus Blast users, Zam is lights out on paper, but once you look at the odds, you realize how much of a coin flip it is. But wait, you say, Zapdos and Raikou use Thunder all the time in GSC, and that's their stab. Yes, but here's the big difference. Those Pokemon are not instantly KO'd if they miss, usually not even close. They can generally afford to miss more than once. However, even these two opted for Thunderbolt instead. Once you get past the bulk of GSC and even advanced, this is much harder to justify. Look at DPP Heatran. Magma Storm is pretty much entirely superior to Fire Blast, insofar as they're the same base power, but instead of Fire Blast's measly burn chance, Magma Storm guarantees extra chip damage and trapping the opponent so they can't double switch on you. So why is it that Heatran doesn't run Magma Storm literally every time? Because in Gen 4, Magma Storm is 70% accurate. Fire Blast's 85% is, while of course occasionally frustrating, so much more reliable it isn't even funny. Magmatran is used, of course, but it is a far more specific choice. Tornadus is a notable exception for its reliance on Hurricane, since its alternatives are not nearly as effective. But again, it is a Pokemon renowned for taking hits, so it can famously afford some misses. Also in Gen 7, it often runs the Flynium Z for the can't miss, high-powered supersonic Sky Strike. Also in Gen 6, its Assault Vest sets, not really concerned with power, often drop Hurricane in favor of Air Slash. Sometimes you just need the accuracy, and Air Slash even comes with a nice flinch rate. Also in Gen 6 through 8, sometimes Torn didn't run Flying Stab at all. Also, the second Torn received a good alternative, which is Gen 9's Bleak Wind Storm, weaker than Hurricane and still strong while packing far more superior 80% accuracy. That became its go-to option. It was really just begging to be able to get away from the unreliable 70% without seriously compromising its effectiveness, which perfectly underlines the whole concept. In a similar vein, Tapu Lele loves finding excuses to not run Focus Blast and is incredibly effective still, but it's just so much scarier with it. Even special attackers that get stabbed on Focus Blast, making it seemingly even more attractive for its upsides, generally avoid it like the plague. There are some exceptions on occasion, like Oras Specs Keldeo or Gen 7 UU Nasty Plot Infernape, but the former isn't paper frail, gets specific buffs from the move, and has a far more reliable option in Secret Sword that it can also slot into its moveset, while the latter can use Fightium Z to turn Focus Blast into a can't miss, powered up all-out pummeling, a trick Tornadus occasionally pulls in OU by the way. DPP Nasty Plot Ape, on the other hand, avoids Focus Blast if it can help it, which it usually can. And that brings us to the problem of most Focus Blast users. There isn't a good alternative. If you use Fire Blast over Flamethrower, you are partially responsible for each miss, unfortunate though they may be. However, Focus Blast does not have a reasonable replacement like Fire Blast does. Some Focus Blasters also have a good alternative. Thundurus, Tornadus, and Hydreigon all have superpower. However, this is coming from their attack stat, which is much lower to begin with, and the users won't be able to invest much in it either, if at all. As a result, though, it can be useful. Superpower also has the nasty habit of coming up short against its targets by a significant margin, and And to make matters worse, the attack and defense drops ensure subsequent hits are weaker and the user is more vulnerable to being picked off by a counterattack. The Alakazams, Gengars, and Tapu Leles of the world though? Nope, nothing. Unless you count hidden power Fire, which is so laughably weak, it suddenly makes the aforementioned superpowers look like Urshifu tier strength. For some reason, even though a perfectly balanced alternative exists, Aura Sphere, which is weaker but still quite powerful and more than sufficient to get the job done, and Alakazam and Gengar both seem like exactly the type of Pokemon to get such a move, lore-wise anyway. Apparently, Aura Sphere has to be restricted to the Lucarios, Mews, and Magirnas of the world. It's especially cruel because Aura Sphere doesn't just have 100% accuracy, it has can't miss no matter what accuracy, just to really mock Focus Blasters a little more, as if the fact that they had to use a move in the first place wasn't sadistic enough of a prank. Funnily enough, many of these Pokemon have been controversial presences across many tiers, and Focus Blast's accuracy has played into it. Some have gone so far as to posit that Focus Blast's accuracy is a necessary balancing act, as it would be broken if it were more accurate, which seems silly, as if misses are the only thing preventing it from being broken, then it's broken anyway. If a move is so busted that you have no choice but to pray for the miss, the move's already an issue. To draw a lofty comparison, Sheer Cold and its ilk are banned from singles for this very reason. Of course, Focus Blast, Incarnate, Landorus, and Thundurus are broken and banned in Gen 5, regardless of their reliance on this inaccurate move, while any serious debate around Alakazam's brokenness or lack thereof doesn't revolve around Focus accuracy. But then again, competitive Pokemon discourse is often silly. This is just a hypothetical anyway, but what's not hypothetical is that arguments have been put forth that Focus Blast's accuracy diminishes the potential brokenness of certain targets. When Landorus Incarnate was trucking through OU, the fact that it would have to Focus Blast twice to get through Rotom Wash, especially defensive Skarmory, was seen as a legitimate point against it. Utterly bizarre as that might seem now. Similar cases were put forth against multiple forms of the other genies as well, Tornadus, Therian, and both variants of Thundurus. So you want to increase your odds to win and you've decided, I will not give in to temptation, no Focus Blast for me. Okay, so non-Focus Blast variants of these pokes. These can work sometimes, but it can and will often bite you, as once you drop this powerful move with such great coverage, these Pokemon become much less scary. So you decide to circumvent the whole issue by not running these pokes at all. While these threats are hardly mandatory, but never running them, your opponent will thank you for not having to deal with the pressure of some of the most terrifying threats around. It will make both their team building and the battle much easier for them. These threats are so scary, even well-built teams piloted effectively are often just one Focus Blast hit away from complete collapse. A risk, obviously, given everything we've discussed, but in all seriousness, you should only be relying on Focus Miss as a last resort. But that's the thing, something like DPP Gengar is so scary that the last resort comes up incredibly quickly, given how easily it picks apart so much in the metagame. It's not 6-0ing healthy teams or anything, but once the chip damage and various hits begin to accumulate across the opposition, it is one of the best options, accuracy willing, to put the opponent away, given its speed, power, and coverage. It's so common for any of the Focus Blasters in general, but most commonly Gengar and Alakazam, to be perfectly poised to win the game, if only Focus Blast connects. If not them, then an Agility Thundurus Therian. Countless battles have been decided by one player going, well, I guess the only way I don't lose to this threat is going to my T-Tar and hoping it misses Focus Blast. On paper, it seems so ridiculous because the T-Tar set in question is outsped and destroyed, but they just have to play for the 30% miss. Infuriatingly, they often are rewarded. So the question is, how different would the game be if these Focus Blast users got Aura Sphere? It seems impossible for anyone to make an argument for their brokenness in good faith, given the power disparity between the moves, especially since in Gen 6 and later, the move is lowered from its original base power of 90 all the way down to 80. This is still more than sufficient to get the job done, of course, but even 90 BP Aura Sphere is hardly breaking anything in Gens 4 and 5 when the metagame is so adjusted around with standard users launching 120 base power at their targets. Gen 4 Life Orb Gengar is still almost always KOing bulkless T-Tar from full health, but T-Tar can EV itself to survive the move much more easily, so there is a balance there. Meanwhile, Gengar will almost never KO zero bulk Heatran even after Stealth Rock, but will still do superb damage. This is great for both sides. Defensively, the hits are easier to stomach, and offensively, you can actually rely on the coverage that's so important. It'd be a similar dance in other generations too, and the fact the Aura Sphere gets its base power nerfed in Gen 6 makes the fact that Gengar, Alakazam, Tornadus Therian, and Hydreigon received Nasty Plot in Generation 8 far more palatable. The combination would have definitely raised some eyebrows earlier on, but then again, any of these pokes having Nasty Plot would have been insane even if they had to rely on Focus Blast. After all, you shouldn't be relying on misses to handle it. There'd be greater emphasis on the positions in battle. No longer would finding yourself advantaged with Thunderous Therian against Excadrill hinge on a 70% chance. If Excadrill was in range, it would drop, no two ways about it. And we can generally agree that limiting the opportunities for players in worse positions to get baited out is a positive for the game. Plus, it's unlikely that anyone would be complaining about such a monstrous threat using a weaker move. So here's the Focus Blast turn Aura Sphere users by generation. Generation 4, already mentioned Gengar, additionally Nasty Plot Infernate benefits, and even Choice Spec stands to become legitimate. Generation 5, Alakazam and Thunderous Therian of course, but Tornadus becomes much more of a consistent choice for raid when it isn't gambling at all against common flying resist, and High Dragon benefits greatly as well. Generation 6, Tornadus Therian's utility sets can fit fighting coverage far more easily now. It still has to fight for inclusion in its moveset, which is difficult, but the likelihood increases because the choice is no longer so flawed and risky, and as a result, it's not only as easy to trap it with Tyranitar anymore. Of course, the biggest threat is Mega Alakazam, which becomes absolutely lights out late game, and even Specs Keldeo enjoys the consistent slam against Pokemon like Rotom Wash and Gastrodon, who run physical defense and are better off against Sacred Sword, and thus the reason it sometimes employs Focus Blast. It won't be cleanly one-hit killing Rotom anymore, but it'll be crushing it for massive damage regardless. Generation 7, once again, Mega Zam and Tornadus Therian. Additionally, Tapu Lele gains a much more reliable option, both great for Specs wall breaking and for using fighting coverage to clean up late game on Scarf sets. Generation 8, once again, Lele is much happier with the move, especially since it has lost hidden power, and thus can no longer find an alternative to threaten Ferrothorn with, while the weakening of Psychic Terrain also means it's nearly as capable of overwhelming Heatran with Brute Force. Tornadus Therian, now brandishing Nasty Plot, becomes far more consistent as well. Generation 9, Darkrai, famed for its inconsistency, absolutely loves being able to ditch Focus Blast for the greater reliability of Aura Sphere. Additionally, when Goldango wants to slot fighting coverage, it can now do so without fear of wasting a perfectly good turn. What makes these especially potent is the capability of terrestrializing into a fighting type, which greatly helps compensate for the drop in power. So how bad is Focus Blast actually? Well, we know how bad 70% is both statistically and how its stats translate into practical terms that infuriate both sides of the player base. Yeah, complaining about missing Focus Blast is one thing, but the true advanced level of this is complaining when your opponent has the absolute nerve to hit 2 in a row. It's been rumored that 3 in a row happened once, but that seems like science fiction. It's not just odds though, it's the fact that Focus Blast users don't have a truly good alternative. They lack the flamethrower to their Fire Blast, and no, hidden power fighting doesn't come close to counting. Superpower almost does, but not quite, and Superpower is either missing or useless on the biggest Focus Blasters anyway. It's not like there are no special fighting moves either. Aura Sphere is right there, but it remains elusive in terms of distribution for some reason. Finally, the real kicker is that Focus Blasters are amongst the scariest Pokemon in the game, and you do yourself a disservice to not use them at least sometimes. It's just a shame that doing so also means inviting variants into a game that doesn't need any help in that regard. We wait patiently for the day that Game Freak deigns to, who knows, boost its accuracy to just 75%. That'd be enough. Knock it down to 115 base power if you want. Nobody would complain. Even 110 would be fine, although at that point make it 80% accurate. We've just seen too many perfectly good games ruined because Focus Blast went to the left multiple times. Thanks for watching everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments I want to know, what do you think about Focus Blast? Is it the worst move ever? Are we totally capping? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazan Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Chica Chihyo for their support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.